1.
Welcome. So, today I am here with Tom Zutaut, who discovered Mötley Crüe, Guns N' Roses, and Tesla. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So, the first question I want to ask you is, how did you get started so young, and what made you want to do it?
Well, it started when I was 5 years old, and I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show at my granny's house. And, you know, I kept bugging her for the next couple of days. You know, I want to hold your hand. I want to hear it again. I want to hear it again. And so she went out and she got me the 45 of the Beatles doing I Want to Hold Your Hand. And I just put it on their record player and played it. And that drove me into like overdrive to get more music. And so when I got back home, you know, I was trying to figure out ways to you know, make money to get records, and I kept bugging my parents for records, and you know, they helped me buy a couple, but I ended up being a really young newspaper carrier. So I delivered newspapers, and I took my newspaper money and I used that to buy records. And so that kind of fed my vinyl obsession.
Wow. Do you still have that vinyl obsession?
I do. My wife will tell you I do. I still have it. I would spend every penny I have on vinyl if I could.
Wow. Where was Granny at? Where was that at?
That was in Detroit.
Gotcha.
So I was born in Detroit, but I grew up in Chicago. When I was about 7 or 8, my parents moved to Chicago, and that was where I figured I could deliver newspapers and, you know, make money to buy more records.
That's awesome.
So, what is your most interesting story you have working with Mötley Crüe?
He jumps right into it.
Man, that's there's a lot of Mötley Crüe stories out there. Let me think. Most interesting Mötley Crüe story. I guess one of the most interesting stories is just driving past the Whiskey A Go-Go and seeing a billboard above it said Mötley Crüe sold out, and I thought, man, I need to go to that show. So I pulled my Jeep over, and I parked it, and I went and I tried to get in, and the woman at the ticket counter was like, yeah, we don't have any more tickets. You can't get in. And I said, well, who owns this place? And she goes, Mario. I go, well, let me talk to Mario. And Mario came out, and he was like an Italian guy. And he kind of looked at me and he said, hey, kid, you know, why should I let you in? And I said, because I do A&R, and I'm going to sign this band, and it's going to make your club famous again. And Mario looked at me and he goes, kid, you got a lot of gumption. And he goes, let me see your business card. So I show him my business card, and it says sales and marketing. He goes, it doesn't even say A&R, so how are you going to sign the band? And I said, well, I got to deal with the chairman. The next band I find, he's going to let me sign them. And, you know, he goes, where you from, kid? I go, I'm from Chicago. He goes, I'm from Chicago. And I go, well, that's cool. He goes, who do you know there? And I said, I tried to think of someone Italian that I knew, right? And I'm like, well, I know Johnny Galgano. He goes, Johnny Galgano? That's Al Capone's grandson. How do you know him? And I didn't know it was Al Capone's grandson, but I did some work for him when I worked for Warner's in Chicago. So I said, well, I did some work for him. He goes, you're all right, kid. Come on in.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Wow, that is amazing.
So, what is your Mount Rushmore of rock bands, like your top 4 favorite bands of all time?
Man, I'd have to put probably about 10 heads on there. I'd start with probably Led Zeppelin, probably Jimmy Page. And then I'd go to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Then I would go with Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend. And then after that, who would it be? Let's see. I mean, probably Elton John.
Yeah.
I'd probably throw Slash and Axl Rose up there. I mean, it's tough, because I really go through a lot of different phases in music. I mean, the last guy that I got a record deal for was a country guy named Colter Wall. Now, I'm not ready to put him on the Mount Rushmore of rock the way that the Hall of Fame put Dolly Parton into the Rock Hall of Fame, and then she went out and made a rock record to justify it. And but anyway, that's probably the best answer I can give you. Those were the cornerstone, bands for me.
Those were pretty good answers. What would be your Mount Rushmore, Noah? Who would be your top four?
Probably Def Leppard, Aerosmith, Queen, and Metallica.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good. That's kind of like the generation after me. I mean, I could certainly see a second round in my life with the ones that you mentioned. I mean, I did get to meet Freddie Mercury back in the day at a crazy party in New Orleans. And, there were a lot of muscle dudes around him, and he was very flamboyant. So it was kind of a crazy scene.
Wow. Yeah, we watched the Led Zeppelin. Remember what was the name of that show?
Becoming Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, we had to go to the IMAX downtown. And he made sure we went out there. It was like 9:00 at night. We had to get there on a work night. But we saw it.
Yeah, that was that was a good movie, but it moved too slow. It was like, I mean, it stopped right when they had finished recording Led Zeppelin 2, and I keep wondering, I mean, I get it, Becoming Led Zeppelin. It was about how Led Zeppelin started, but there was some, like, footage in there that I didn't really need to see. It's just a lot of old footage of them playing on stage, and I would have liked to have seen them maybe get to Led Zeppelin 3 at least, and then, pick up the next one on Led Zeppelin 4, but it was a great movie for what it was, and Stacy and I, we went to see it, and I was glad that we did.
Yeah, it was a good show.
You got to tell the story about how when you found out Pete Davidson was going to play you in The Dirt.
Oh,
yeah. What was your reaction when you found that out?
Well, I tell you, I mean, I said to the person from Netflix, I said, does he look like me? And they said, no, he doesn't look like you. And I said, well, the other actors I've seen that, you've picked them out and they kind of look like which member of Mötley Crüe they're playing. And they said, I said, and then they needed my permission and stuff to use my name. And I said, well, the current script isn't going to work. And I said, I got to figure out this Pete Davidson thing, because if he doesn't look like me, that's kind of weird. And they said, don't worry, he's true star power. We need some star power in the movie. And I thought to myself, I don't even know who this guy is. I mean, he's a star of some kind. So I called my brother, and my brother was like, you don't know, like, he's the biggest comedian in the world. He's like the top guy on Saturday Night Live. And I said, man, I haven't watched Saturday Night Live since Paul Simon made Lorne Michaels put Edie Brickell on.
Noah doesn't watch Saturday Night Live, apparently. We like the Blues Brothers, though.
Yeah,
big Blues Brothers fan.
Yeah, well, I once played the Blues Brothers at an event in Chicago, I dressed up like one of the Blues Brothers, had blue makeup on my face, and ran around all the record stores to promote the release of their record.
Wow, really? That's awesome.
So what is the most famous album you produced, and which one was your favorite?
Well, the most famous one is obviously Appetite for Destruction. I mean, it stands the test of time. It was a hard record to make. It took 2 years to make it. Mike Klink did a great job engineering and recording it, and I had to get Thompson and Barbiero to come in and mix it because, Mike Klink couldn't figure out how to mix it without losing the raw essence, and the way we picked Mike Klink to do it was off of him being an engineer. And I thought, he'll capture it. And I thought he would mix it too, but then we had to get Thompson and Barbiero to mix it. But he did a great job of, catching a tiger by its tail and authentically recording the band so that, I call it capturing lightning in a bottle. Like making records is like capturing lightning in a bottle. And, so many people, they want to, put the lid on the bottle and, not let it roar out. They want to change it because they have this perception of this is a live band and this is a recording, and they try to turn, the live band into a recorded band. And with Guns N' Roses on a first record, there was no way to do that. You had to capture the lightning and keep the lightning in the bottle, get the bottle to the point where it was about ready to explode, and then uncork it and point it in the right directions.
Wow. That's good. That's a good analogy.
So what is the story behind how you found Metallica?
Well, they came to me. That's actually the story. Yeah, they came to me. They wanted off of Megaforce Records. They wanted off that label, and they needed $250,000 to get off the label. So Lars called me, and then his attorney, Peter Paterno, called me. And, we couldn't really interfere with their contract with Megaforce, with Johnny Z and Marcia Z or whatever their names were. We couldn't interfere with that, but I told him, I said, okay, we'll loan you the $250,000 to fight your lawsuit. And if you lose, you owe us $250,000. If you win, you'll be signed to Elektra. And I went in the studio because Mike Klink was working with him and he was having problems. They were having a problem with him, and they ultimately went and used a different producer. But, Lars, back before there were computers as part of the music process, everything was organic and real. And the studio was complaining that it was taking like a month to do one drum track. And I said, well, how can that be? And they said, because Lars insists on playing the drums and doing every rhythm hit one at a time. And so I went down to the studio and I said to Lars, I said, so tell me about this one hit at a time. And he went into a long discussion about how every drum there's a sweet spot on the head. And if you're just playing uncontrolled, you can't always hit the sweet spot. So what he did is he made the record one hit at a time. And so they'd have to make slaves off of the digital tape because you'd wear the tape out.
Wow.
So they'd make a slave and they'd work on it until it started to lose fidelity. And every drum track was recorded one hit at a time in the precise spot, the right part of the stick. And he was totally focused on that. And then, you go back and you listen to Enter Sandman, and, I mean, that record speaks for itself.
Oh, yeah. That's amazing. So what do you think that the new digital era, what type of thing do you think loses or is lost with that we doesn't have the same thing that you guys had?
Well, I mean, rock is dead. Why is rock dead? I mean, nobody's capturing lightning in a bottle. Everybody is letting a computer turn them into perfection. I mean, Metallica are a band that strives for perfection, Tesla are a band that strives for perfection. Dokken were a band that strive for perfection. GNR strives for perfection. Bands today, I mean, AI can make a hit song. Whoops, sorry, AI can make a song these days. So, before AI, you could just say, AI, make a song that sounds like Enter Sandman meets Shout at the Devil, and you'll have it,
Wow. Yeah.
So before AI completely made the song, AI was making, Lars's drums sound perfect. Although, I wasn't involved in their, more recent records, so they may have done it organic, just because of how authentic they are. But I think that, capturing lightning in a bottle is a real thing, and the minute you let computers interfere or you let some kind of artificial process, it's not the same.
Yeah. I was listening to an interview with Slash the other day where he was talking about Paradise City, talking about driving back from San Francisco to Los Angeles in the van, and he said that they were just kind of beating around on the guitar, and he kind of hammered out the riff a little bit there, and then he said that's where it started. And just can't imagine having that kind of roots in something like Paradise City come out of a AI machine,
Yeah, I mean, Sweet Child of Mine, it was a doodle that, Slash played at sound checks, and we kept bugging him to turn it into a song, and finally, Izzy Stradlin just turned it into a song, and Slash protested it, and, I was waiting for like one special song that could go to number one, and, Mark Cantor, who was like the fifth Beatle in GNR, I mean, he went to high school with the original drummer, Steven Adler, and Slash. They all went to Fairfield High School and stuff, and he called me one day and he goes, "Man, you got to come to Madame Wong's West tonight because they're going to play this song live for the first time. It's the one that you've been waiting for, to let them start recording." And I went to Madame Wong's and I said, "All right, we're ready to record." We got that one song we were missing.
Wow, recorded it at their first live?
No, I'm just saying we're ready to go make a record now. Like that was the song they needed to make Appetite. They needed that one song that was going to be a number one hit. In fact, I wrote on a piece of paper and I sealed it in an envelope and I gave it to the head of promotion and I said, "If you're opening this envelope, I'm either dead or Sweet Child of Mine went to number one."
Awesome. Yeah, we talked about Sweet Child of Mine. Remember?
And Slash hated it.
Yeah.
He does. He still hates it.
You were talking about who it was written for.
It's like his nightmare is that silly doodle that he played at sound checks in the early days, turned into like a number one song worldwide. I mean, November Rain gets more views on YouTube, but, Sweet Child of Mine is still the biggest song they ever did.
Yeah,
and now it's my ringtone.
Yeah, he's even got Slash on his phone on the screen.
Oh, what, doing the doo-doo-doo-doo?
Yeah.
Sweet Child of Mine?
Yeah, we actually went to
that's cool.
A big event one day where we had to take our phones out and everything, and the guy said his cousin was Slash. He saw a Slash on his... Remember that?
Yeah.
The security guy. He said, "Slash is my cousin." No, I don't know if he was telling the truth.
I don't think so.
He thought it was cool.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I've not heard of anyone from Slash's family doing any kind of security, so that might have been a stretch.
Probably was.
Who knows?
Yeah, just making us smile.
Yeah.
What you got else?
So were there any mentors or key figures who helped shape your path?
There were a lot along the way. I mean, when I was in high school, the librarian was the one who, fed my passion for music in my head. And, she always knew what I needed, and it was this weird thing where I would go into the library after school and I would ask her about a certain subject and she'd go pull out a book and open it up and show me the page that answered my question. Like, it was really, really cosmic. And I remember when I was a senior in high school and I had the opportunity to either go to New York and work for Atlantic or go to L.A. and work for Elektra. And I asked her what I should do, and she goes, go west, young man. And so I did, and I'd been to, well, I'd never been to L.A. before, but I'd been to New York, and it stunk real bad. Like, it just smelled bad. It made me sick to hang around there on the streets in the summer, and garbage everywhere, and it was just ugly, So when she said go west, and, we were fed a steady stream of California sunbathers and people swimming in the ocean, and,
Beach boys.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's like the biggest lie ever, because when you get there and you drive your car down to the beach and there's nobody in the water, nobody. And you're like, okay, this is weird, because all I saw was people swimming in the water, in the ocean. And you see somebody come out of the ocean looking like a fish, they're in a wetsuit and stuff. And you go to the water and it's too darn cold to even put more than your foot in it. And so in the Midwest and in Chicago or Detroit, you have this vision of Hollywood and Malibu, and then you get out there and you find out it was all a lie. But I was happy to live there. I mean, I lived there for almost 40 years, wow. 35 years, yeah.
What made you so good that at 18 you had people wanting you to come to New York and L.A. to work for them? Is there an it factor that you had that other people didn't?
I look at it this way, and my mom used to say this all the time, she was kind of religious, and she would say, everybody is born with a unique gift. And it's only when we put everyone's gifts together that we can make the world a better place. And I know it sounds kind of sappy, but it always ran through the back of my mind. And I was able in high school, and even before, I was able to, use all my paper route money. And then when I was 15, I got a job stuffing the newspapers at the newspaper warehouse and made more money doing that than delivering. And then I was like, the minute I had a driver's license, I was delivering the papers in a van to the newspaper boys. And, so I always had a way to make the money to buy records. And so, I would put a review in the newspaper of a new band like Foreigner, and I would say, this band's going to be big. The Cars album came out. I said, this band's going to be big. And, the newspaper editor said to me once, he said, how do you find these bands and you can predict they're going to be big? And I said, it's just an instinct. I can't explain it. My mom would say, it's my unique gift, right? So part of me wanting to go to Hollywood, right, was I wanted to see if I could get into garages and see these like new bands. And like, it's one thing to listen to a finished record, right? So I'm listening to a Foreigner record that someone produced and polished a rough diamond. I'm listening to the Cars. Roy Thomas Baker took the Cars and made them something, right? The producer, engineer. So, it was a challenge in the back of my mind to see if I could go into the clubs and find something and polish the rough diamond and turn it into something. So, my answer to that is that was my gift. Music is my truly God-given gift. And when I combine that with the person who knows how to market the music, the person who knows how to get it on the radio, when that all comes together, it's a home run. I mean, I signed over 40 artists that sold 1 million or more.
Wow.
And, I was driven to find them, by an unknown power from above. They just, things fell into my lap. I mean, Guns N' Roses, I just saw a poster /drew of the Pistols with roses wrapped around them and stuck it on a telephone pole. I was driving down Sunset again, and I seen it, and I pulled it off. And a week later, I was at this record store I used to buy like import records at on Melrose Avenue in L.A. And, the guy looked at me and he goes, listen, no offense, Mötley Crüe were really cool, but this band is way better than Mötley Crüe. You need to see them before someone else finds them. And that's after me digging taking Slash's poster off the wall and stuffing it in my car. But,
already on your radar.
Yeah, it was already on my radar, and that when that guy at the record store told me, I was like, okay, I got to get to this, see the very next show. But I think, to get back to your real question, we all have a gift. If you recognize your gift and you use your gift for positive things. And so I had an inkling of it from writing those articles in the newspaper. And then I'd watch 6 months later or the following year, the band would explode. They didn't always explode instantly. But the editor, and we had, I was so lucky, my high school had an FM radio station. And as a freshman, they made me the music director, the first time a freshman was involved in station management. My sophomore year, they made me the station manager. So I ran the radio station as a sophomore. It's usually a senior, because that was my gift, doing radio and music. And, and I was lucky to have a high school. We printed a weekly newspaper. And the newspaper editor, he said to me, after, my third year of my, junior year of writing this column about music, he goes, how come nothing you've written about has ever failed? And I said, well, I don't feel like it's a good use of space to proper, to present and prosper negativity. So I said, I want to be about the light. And, if I'm wrong, and if, maybe out of 50 columns that I wrote, maybe a couple of them, the records never succeeded, right? But 48 out of 50 did. And I never focused on the negative. I always only reviewed music or concerts that I thought were really great.
That's a great answer. I love that answer. We were talking about gifts on the way over here, that Noah having a special gift, and that's very interesting that you'd say that. I really like that.
Yeah, and we didn't have medications for anything. It was sort of like, I have really crazy ADD, and I can wander off on endless tangents, you ask me a question, and, we might be like in the Mojave Desert.
Yeah, your wife's over here shaking her head, like, yeah, sure.
I learned how to cope with it. And, I lived in a world that was very different. The world is very different now. In fact, in 2019, when I moved to Chattanooga, and my dad, convinced me to move here because he was lonely. He didn't tell me that. But I'm happy I moved here, and I'm living as normal of a life as someone who went through what I went through could. I was surrounded by rock stars. I was surrounded by movie stars. I was surrounded by egomaniacs that ran film companies, TV companies, record companies. And so, it's been a big learning curve. And then 1 month after I moved here, my TV show got picked up, Paradise City. It streams on Peacock now. And I was back in Hollywood, doing that crazy thing again. And it was like God was saying, do you want to move back here? Do you want to live here? And I just couldn't wait to get back to Chattanooga.
Wow.
Because I'm kind of done with that phase of my life. But again, while I was in Chattanooga, I ran into Coulter Wall, and I helped him get a deal. And if there was some new band or artist out there that I felt passionate about, I could get re-involved in a heartbeat if it's real music and it needs someone to capture its lightning and put it in a bottle.
That's awesome.
So what was it like being involved with some of the biggest artists in history?
Yeah, that's kind of what we were just talking about. How do you stay grounded in a situation like that? Especially when you're trying to focus on a profession, you're trying to keep everything at a professional level.
Ask me that question again. My mind wandered.
What was it like being involved with some of the biggest artists in history?
It was like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. I kind of talked about it just before you asked the question. Right. It was insane. On all levels. my ADD worked well. You know, I might have had 10 records getting made, 5 bands on tour, and I was just jittering about between all of them, focusing on their problems, trying to fix the issues, you know. So Tesla's having a problem with a producer, so I got to fly to New York, go in the studio, sort it out. And then I got to get back on the road with Guns N' Roses to get Axl to sing the last song for Use Your Illusions. And then I have David Geffen calling me, begging me to come back because Mike Scott hates every A&R person at the label, but he wants to sign him because he thinks he's the next Bob Dylan. And I've got to get back to L.A. to meet with Mike Scott. And I'm like, you know, you can't call me every day and hammer me on the $200 million you're going to get 60 days after Use Your Illusions 1 and 2 ship. You can't put that pressure on me. I'm dealing with a guy that don't want to sing the last song on the record because he probably is having insecurities about if the record's good enough to follow up Appetite for Destruction. I mean, we got him to put out Lies, which was like the Live Like a Suicide with 5 unplugged songs, and it wasn't like a real album, you know. So I said, you know, you just got to choose the priority. I said, but, you know, what if I leave this tour and that's the one day he wants to sing and then I'm not there, right? So I was out on tour with Guns N' Roses for almost 8 months, like every day, you know, doing the same routine, trying to get him to sing. And, you know, and then there were other, like I had to deal with a lot of stuff over the phone because I couldn't get off that tour, but I did get off to sort out that one problem for Tesla. And I eventually, there was like a 2-day break, and Axl was going to go to New York to see, you know, Stephanie Seymour. And I decided to go back to L.A. I was going to go home, and I told David Geffen, I said, this is the window, you know. I mean, with my luck, he'll call me and want to sing it in New York while he's there for 2 days with Stephanie Seymour he hasn't seen in weeks. So, but I said, that's my window, and he flew Mike Scott to L.A. I had the meeting, and Mike Scott looked at me, and he goes, yeah, he goes, you're the one, you know, you're the one that God wants me to work with. And I was just being myself. I wasn't like trying to work with him, you know, because it would have been easier for me not to work with him, because part of working with Mike Scott on that Waterboys record, it was called Dream Harder, was he wouldn't sign the contract until I went and spent 2 weeks in Ireland with him. And all we did was drive around to find the best tasting pint of Guinness in Ireland. Right, and it's a live beer there. It's not like everywhere else in the world. It's a dead beer, but it has live cultures in Ireland. It's a very different beer there. And I didn't really drink. So it was pretty tough, you know, and I'd have to say to Mike, I'd be like, well, we've had about 5 pints of Guinness and we've been to 4 places. I said, we better find somewhere to stay. I said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to drive on the wrong side of the road. He's like, no, mate, you're on the wrong side of the road, not us.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
So, you know, and so I did 2 weeks on the Mike Scott tour of Ireland. He actually was Scottish, but he accepted Ireland as his home. And, I don't remember a lot of it because I never drank, and I drank for those 2 weeks because this deal was so important to David Geffen, and, you know, I wanted to close the deal for him.
Do you know who Mike Scott is?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, well, look him up. It's a band called the Waterboys. I mean, he's still touring, and it was about him and Carl Wallinger, and they put out a record that everyone thought he was going to be the next Bob Dylan, like he was just this voice and this lyrical genius. And, you know, I thought they were cool. I liked them. But, you know, it was only David Geffen's strong desire to sign them that pushed me to, on my only 2 days not on the Guns N' Roses jet, you know, flying around, checking into a hotel at like 4 a.m, getting up at 3 a.m, getting my daughter up so she could do Matt Sorum's sound check for him, and I had my kid on the road with me too. She was like 4 years old. She wasn't in kindergarten yet.
Wow.
So, that was that this is just a glimpse at how insane, that world can be. I mean, I stumbled into, Renee Zellweger. I mean, I went with a rock band to a strip club, and she worked in the club, but she was really nice. She wanted to be an actress. And so, she was babysitting my daughter for me while I was working with this band. And, I told her how to get into a movie. I said, buy the Hollywood Reporter or Variety, and there'll be casting calls in the back. Look for one in Texas. And she called me. She's like, man, I got this film, it's called Love in a 45. And I go, that's a cool name, right? Love in a 45 single.
Right.
And it ended up winning, what do you call that thing in a Sundance Award. And that started her career. And then, later.
That's crazy.
I said, if you're serious about this, then you got to move to L.A. And one of my assistants had a spare room come up because her roommate left. And I said to my assistant, there's this girl in Texas. She starred in this one movie, and she won a Sundance Award. And, she wants to come out here. Could she rent your room? And, I covered the rent for like 3 or 4 months. And then after she got out to L.A., I ended up getting a job in New York. So I moved to New York, and, I didn't really talk to her. And I came back to Hollywood a year and a half later, and Renee Zellweger was up on every billboard, for Jerry Maguire.
Wow.
So, and then, she went from there to those other films.
How do you stay grounded, right? How do you not become the egomaniac? How do you, that surrounded by all those big egos and seeing all of the famous, I'm starstruck. I couldn't imagine being in a situation like that.
Well, a lot of it probably is from my mom, just, everyone has a gift. When we put all our gifts together, that's how we make the world a better place. So, I tried to never look at myself as being better than anyone else. And, I'm always reminded when I see a greeter at Walmart and I go in there and I'm like, yeah, they're part of the world. They're no better or no worse than anybody else,
Amen.
We all, we all contribute our piece to the world, and we try to find our way. But, it's not easy to try and, after all of that, try and live a normal life. I mean, it creates a lot of friction. A lot of people think, that just because you did all that, they put things on you. They make, they think that you feel like you're empowered or have hierarchy over them, and I don't really see it that way. Every now and then when I get bad food at a restaurant and I get snotty about it, I'm reminded of the word these days is a Karen, don't be a Karen, right?
That's funny.
But it's hard, I mean, I have to fight some instincts, because you can't go from that world to living a normal life without, eating a lot of humility.
I see. Wow.
So how has the role of a music executive evolved since you first entered the business, and what has changed in terms of artist development?
There is no artist development. Artists have to develop themselves, or they have to let somebody scam them and put money into them and, follow their direction and hope that they know what they're doing. Record labels just don't do development anymore.
You got to already have the talent. There's talent searches.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get 1 million people to watch you on social media, someone will probably sign you. But before you get to 1 million, there's a lot of hucksters along the way. You just have to have faith in yourself, faith in what you do. And, like Coulter Wall, he's got a record deal and he's got everything he needs. And, I was in his life for a brief period of time, but, I helped him get to the next step so that people know who he is now. He kind of is like a modern Johnny Cash in a way.
Wow. I bet he thinks that's the greatest thing ever, too, to say he was signed by the same people that signed Mötley Crüe and Guns N' Roses.
He's kind of a weird guy. I don't even know if he would think of it like that. He's sort of an idiot savant, but a great artist.
That's awesome.
So what qualities do you look for when deciding whether to sign a major artist?
Well, when you sign them, they're not major yet, so it would be an unknown artist. But
a wannabe major.
Yeah, a wannabe major. To answer your question as best that I can, I feel like in order for me to get involved, it has to make sense. In other words, I have to be emotionally moved by the music. I have to see a live show and see if they can connect with an audience. And then, I have to see if I go into a dream state, right? And what I mean by that is when I saw Mötley Crüe, when I finally got into that club and learned that Johnny Galgano was Al Capone's grandson from Mario, the Italian guy from Chicago that owned the Rainbow, the Roxy, and the whiskey, I went into this like daydreaming thing, like after they played 3 or 4 songs, and all of a sudden I was in a field with 1 million people and they were watching Mötley Crüe on the stage, and it was like a deja vu. And then 2 years later, they were playing the US Festival opening for Ozzy, and there were like 1 million people there.
Mm. Wow.
So, with Guns N' Roses, I had the same thing. When I saw them play live, I saw their explosion in front of 20,000 people, 100,000 people. And, you just, again, it's like this instinct kind of thing. And, whenever you try to use your commercial sense, it usually fails. Like if you're like, okay, well, this sounds like it could be great, but their live show sucks. I got to fix that. And it usually never works. It's like they're either poised for something special or they're just nothing. It doesn't mean that I didn't sign Rock City Angels and think that they were going to be like the Leonard Skinner meets Guns N' Roses Southern rock band. I mean, they were from Florida like Tom Petty and stuff, but, they imploded. I mean, their lawyer was Led Zeppelin's lawyer. I mean, they opened for the Page Plant when they did that tour. Mm. And the singer of that band chose, after David Geffen and Jimmy Page's manager spent 2 years cleaning him up off drugs. I mean, this young punk singer, he went backstage after the show and, got Jimmy back on heroin. And his manager, Jimmy Page's manager, called David Geffen, and David Geffen said, "You know what?" He goes, "I don't give 2 shits about this band. Their career is over." Mm. And that was the end of that.
Wow, that's almost like you were talking about your time in high school when you were writing the newspapers. You kind of had that vision that these guys are going to be great. Like you carried that into your professional life as well.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, 100%.
That's awesome.
So, can you describe a moment, a particular riff, a lyric, even the way a band carried themselves on stage where your gut screamed yes, even if your gut said no, but you knew you had to follow that feeling?
So, like, you heard something or saw something that was really just, these guys have got to have it, but the commercial side of you saying, no, they're not going to make it.